Hello, and welcome to the Regrettable Century. It's everyone, all the dudes here this time. And we're here to talk about Trump's first 100 days. You know, all of his massive accomplishments, the way he's revolutionizing the American democracy, making everyone more free, and helping the economy be the most badass it has ever been. We'll have to dub in the background like a screaming eagle.
Dude, definitely.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, now's the best time ever to start your new business. This is what NPR is telling me every time I listen to their 5-minute news updates.
So one conservative podcast that I keep up with regularly has always regularly. Why did that sound so weird when I said it? It has this pre-recorded commercial that's like, the economy is booming. I'm like, is it? Is it really booming? I don't think that it is.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thinks it is. I've never heard that before. I have heard lots of conservatives say it's not.
Well, I have heard conservatives say to buy gold because gold is still going up.
Yeah. But that's not a good sign for the economy.
No, it's not.
I mean, I think this is just like the we've heard of fascist creep, and this is just like manifesting creep into real politic. This is what the MAGA movement has supplied the right with, is just manifesting reality.
Well, if you listen to Tucker Carlson, the ads on his show are demons are in your internet. Get this new thing to protect you. Well, it's just it's all ads trying to scam boomers by making them scared.
Well, someone's got to fill in the void left behind by Alex Jones,
I said, well, he's not nearly as sensational as Alex Jones, but
also Alex Jones isn't gone.
Yeah, he's still there.
For some reason, he's still gone. Okay, never mind.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, the worst thing about Tucker Carlson is not even his politics. It's the banjo music. That's the intro to his show. And then he was like, and the ads to scam boomers. And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about those. But anyway, so we're here to talk about the glorious rule of our 1,000-year God Emperor.
One thing that's going to be very interesting is to see how Donald Trump's 100 days, there's still 2 more days before the 100-day mark hits. Yeah, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it compares to the original 100 days when Napoleon came back from Elba and then eventually lost at Waterloo and then got exiled to St. Helena.
Oh my God. What an appropriate analog to these days.
So is Trump going to launch attacks on Iran and then lose and be deposed? Is that what happens?
One thing about the Napoleon's 100 days is there was a plebiscite and a reformed constitution. I don't know if that's going to be who knows? Maybe Donald Trump's going to pull a fast one, but probably not.
So much of these moves that he's making, which I'm sure we'll get into, everything will depend upon how he can narrativize it into a win. If they're all duds, if he's just a fucking loser, I think those changes are going to be these things we've been wondering about may kind of revert.
His polling is abysmal, even among his own supporters. So
this morning I watched.
Nobody likes what he's doing.
Yeah, this morning I watched a Fox News roundtable. I forget what show, but Fox and Friends or something, and they were talking about Donald Trump's polling, and everyone has to admit, Donald Trump is polling really poorly, and no one can hide it anymore, except for, of course, Trump, who also thinks that the Supreme Court voted 9-0 for him instead of 9-0 against him.
But that was a
I wonder
gift,
if that's
though.
what his briefing said.
Dude, it probably is. I do think that Donald Trump is just a guy who doesn't know what's going on. And in Biden's case, it was kind of sad. But in Trump's case, it's, he's more haughty, more obnoxious. And so it's infuriating.
But that's also been part of his bravado, is that he doesn't need to know what the fuck's going on. He's just going to know what he's going to do. And that's what people rally behind. They don't give a fuck about what's going on. All they care about is just,
Are the libs being owned?
Yeah, yes. But move fast, break things, deport, and so on. I was going to mention,
interestingly enough, his immigration policy isn't even what's making him unpopular, because liberals support Donald Trump's efforts at border control, not so much his efforts at reversing the effects of the previously deficient border control.
Right.
As if one thing isn't tied to the other.
Even the overall numbers of deportations are not nearly what were promised. They're just more scandalous, high profile, renditioning of people who have the legal right to be here.
Well, I mean, I want to caution over exaggerating the distinction here, because the way the numbers are counted for comparison purposes is every detainee caught attempting to cross the border and then turned away is considered deportation. Now, it didn't used to. That was a change made under Obama.
Which is why Obama did such good numbers.
Yeah,
with deportations.
Actually. And the reality is, I've recently went to a talk where attorneys were being invited to provide pro bono representation to migrants, and the presenters were saying, here we need attorneys, we need bodies showing up, and people who have bar degrees and or bar admission to appear here. We will provide you the legal support so you have the sort of the know-how. You're not coming into this totally unawares, but we need more attorneys representing more people. And somebody asked, are you seeing a difference? Are you seeing a change, a rise in the number of deportees needing representation since Trump came into office? And the answer they gave was the local facility that holds detainees that have been rounded up is full now, and it wasn't before. So even though the numbers of deportations may not be actually exceeding those that were accomplished under Obama or Biden, I think that it is likely the case, and time will tell when these numbers can ultimately be parsed. I think it is likely the case that a lot of those numbers accomplished under Biden and Obama were people caught and released at the attempting to cross at the border, whereas we're likely getting a lot fewer of those under Trump right now. I think there's probably a lot fewer people trying to cross the border, and there's a lot more attention being put by ICE on rounding people up and deporting them from within the borders.
There's also a bottleneck. They haven't deported as many people as they detained.
Exactly. There is an absolute capacity issue. Like I think that Trump's ICE would love to be deporting a hell of a lot more than they actually are, and there are physical capacity issues, barriers that they have. They need increased funding, and even with increased funding, they would need time to increase capacity.
Right. That's why
it's so stupid. Why not just increase it gradually so that you can work within your capacity? And then go after the easy ones and not after the whole high profile ones. It's just, there's nothing about like the way that Trump's administration does anything that makes any kind of sense.
No, and the reversing of the policy that was under the previous administrations, there was a policy of prioritizing those who have been arrested for criminal conduct, became a deportation priority. That's gone. He removed that prioritization. So there is now equal priority for immigration violations, no matter what the criminal record of the individual is. Seems like if your concern is the rapists and the murderers coming into this country, then it would seem like you would want to prioritize those who've been criminally convicted or at least accused. That's not the case.
This was Joe Rogan's gripe about it, right? That we talked about. His criticism of the policy was that it wasn't actually going after the supposed criminals that it said it was.
And instead, as of Friday morning, 3 children under the age of 10 who are U.S. citizens were deported by ICE, including one with stage 4 cancer who has no access to their medical treatment or doctors. And they were deported without legal representation.
I actually heard Joe Rogan say that he says, if you wanted to make sure that your plan failed, this is how you would go about doing it. was by it's like I don't want to be conspiratorial or anything, but it seems to me like the people that are in charge of running the mass deportations are setting it up to cast it in the worst light that it could be possibly cast in. And it's like, yeah, I mean, and then the other guy that was on was just like, yeah, I don't know if that's what they're doing, if they're doing it on purpose, but it's certainly what they're doing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking the whole time. I was just like, it's sort of like whenever John Bolton and all the other neocons in his first administration purposely set him up to fail with his peacemaking initiatives to whomever. I'm thinking North Korea specifically. But I don't think that's actually what's going on. I think that you should never attribute to conspiracy to malice, which you can attribute what like idiocy will explain or incompetence.
Yeah.
Especially in Trump 2, what seems to be the case is in Trump 1, there was a lot more just like chaos and lack of a backbench for Trump to draw on. In Trump 2, there seems to be much more of a backbench full of yes men who are ready and willing and capable of just saying, what do you want, sir? Yes, sir. Whatever you tell us to do, we'll run off and implement this policy and make it happen in full maximum drive. And without any pushback or any suggestion of like, actually, there are reasons why we wouldn't want to do this. This wouldn't actually play out well for us. And nobody's willing to say give those qualifications to them. So it's just being implemented incompetently.
The result is still chaos. Yeah. It's just it's because of incompetence and yes men, rather than just not knowing what to do, not knowing how anything works. Instead, it's because even the people who know how things work just won't say anything. So Trump has said publicly that you're never supposed to hire anybody that's smarter than you are, which that's since Trump is an idiot, everyone that he's got working for him is even dumber than he is.
Yeah. I'm thinking about all this like clever, how you mentioned their interpretation of the Supreme Court decision 9-0 in their favor, all this sort of stretching of the unitary executive theory. That's how they're trying to get around all the limitations of infrastructural capacity and so forth, is by that's what this whole thing of deep renditioning men to El Salvador was, right? Like he was able to do that because he changed the category of who a terrorist is. So they're trying to like manipulate the sort of executive authority and legality and get ahead of the ball, really. But even that seems to be run incompetently.
Obama
era. The masterminds seem incompetent in that regard too. It's just that they have a lot of codependence with the Supreme Court. That's why they're able to interpret it as 9-0 in their favor.
The basis for him detaining and deporting people is Obama's indefinite detention bill from 2011.
Yeah, that is very, very, very much so. So I think there's a balance to be struck here that in not downplaying the horrors of what Trump is trying to do. Not always successfully, but that he is trying to do pretty outrageous and, at least in recent memory, unprecedented maneuvers and changes in policy that we shouldn't shy away from castigating and opposing in whatever way we have available to us. But on the other hand, what the liberals really want to downplay and ignore and pretend isn't true, despite the fact that it is how much the establishment DNC and previous Democratic administrations and Congresses have laid the groundwork for every single thing that Trump is doing. Every single one of them. And how feckless their pretend opposition to him absolutely is, precisely because of this. Because they can't actually oppose the substantive grounds for which he enacts any of these outrageous things that he does, are 100% to a fucking T, to the last one, policies that they advocated, promoted, and passed and adopted themselves, created the precedent for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason why there are all kinds of criticisms from liberal talk shows about the illegality and the improper procedural moves, which are all true. But there's not really much substance otherwise.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's why like Cory Booker will do something like a 25-hour filibuster, and then just vote with the Republican Party anyways.
So
that his filibuster wasn't actually a filibuster,
right?
Because it wasn't impeding anything, and he also like got permission to do it first and let everybody know it was going to happen. It's like the dumbest, least useful, and most like spectacular thing he could have done.
The most perfectly quintessential Democratic Party politician act of resistance that could possibly ever be done.
Yep. Totally hollow.
So there's just an immense amount of just strategic buffoonery on the part of the Democrats when it comes to building up this massive state, this massive repressive state with tentacles that reach all over the world, where you could kill anybody, arrest anybody with a push of a button, and
U.S. citizens. Yeah, the first the precedent being established of not deporting but assassinating a U.S. citizen who has not been accused of a single crime was established by Barack Obama.
Yeah, so they really thought. Well, first of all, I mean, putting aside how unethical, unconstitutional, and just absolutely dangerous it is, they're stupid enough to really think that they were never going to lose the presidency again. And if they did, it would probably just be to a John McCain or somebody like that, who is essentially like identical to the Democrats anyway, except for he pays lip service to, well, I don't know about that gay marriage stuff, and then everyone goes along with the agenda of killing people in foreign countries.
Yeah, he's an American patriot.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, so like we read a couple of articles for today, and one of them was an article in The Nation by a guy who I don't know who he is, but it was a decent enough article, and it's called "The New McCarthyism Was Started by Liberals."
Yeah,
which is absolutely correct.
He studies.
Is it Jeet Heer?
Yeah.
Oh, I know who Jeet Heer is. Yeah.
He's a scholar of the right and of kind of liberalism, the stuff we've just been talking about. He's been studying for a long time.
Right. And he makes the case that the most egregious assaults on civil liberties were basically set up by the Obama administration. Not Obama, sorry, the Biden administration. But also these things go back to the not just the Obama administration, because it was the George Bush administration that created all of these exceptions. And then Obama, carried it through, and then Biden teed up Trump in order to be able to start deporting people for having the improper opinions.
I love how he reaches back to the Cold War and references the Murray Kempton interview of this historian, Athan Theoharis, who says that McCarthyism was only Trumanism carried to its logical conclusion.
And then he says that Trumpism is Bidenism carried to its logical conclusion.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. And that was actually where I was getting to with my roundabout sort of stumbling statements so far. But yeah, I mean, it was Biden who came out and criticized all the protesters as anti-Semitic and started working with policemen, the police on campus to crack down on these protests in order to, quote, protect Jewish students. And, it's perfect for someone like Trump, who is not like a, mealy-mouthed coward like all Democratic politicians are, to like actually carry through on these people are supporting terrorists. Is that what you're saying? Well, okay, well, we have like systems in place to deal with terrorist support, and we're going to go ahead and utilize them. And so everything that they're doing is legal and constitutional if these people are actually providing material support to terrorists. Of course, they've not proved it, but that's the thing, is that they don't have to. They don't have to prove it. Indefinite detention and deportation is legal.
Yeah, we'll see if they have to or not. That'll be subject to ultimately subject to judicial review. But so far, the courts have proven to be at best timid in opposing Trump. And the most robust oppositions he's faced has been trial level courts, and the Supreme Court has not had their back. That 9-0 opinion, typically, one of the things I learned in law school was like a 9-0 opinion is like that is the court's way of being as forceful as it possibly can. There are historical examples of this, of the court being like, really forceful about a hot button social issue or whatever, and they'll intentionally craft an opinion that says that can get a full 9-0, so that there's a lack of ambiguity that the court is being very forceful about this position. But in order to get that 9-0 vote on that case that it didn't tell him to bring what's his name
facilitate
back from, El Salvador, that word facilitate is the word that it was they changed the word from previous version that said something like I forget what the previous version was, but it was something much more direct, of ordering the president to retrieve this individual from El Salvador, and instead they changed it to facilitate his return to the United States in order to get the all 9 justices on board. And because of that change of word, Trump has used that as, I don't really have to go do anything.
So the original one was effectuate.
Yeah, effectuate. Yeah. Ordering him to effect it, to make it happen. Yeah. And change
it seems to be what the original.
They're no longer ordering him to make it happen. They're only ordering him to facilitate it if El Salvador, gives the individual up.
Yeah.
This textualist, actually, maybe you can educate me here. It seems like it's just a language game. These right-wing sort of originalist or textualist arguments are just finding these bits of language that can be interpreted in wildly different directions, and then authoritatively.
I'm not sure what you mean. Originalists and textualists are two opposite. Opposite.
Which one am I thinking of then? Originalist is textualist has more flexibility.
I guess it depends. There's some like possibility of overlap. It's sort of like Venn diagram or whatever, 2 circles. There's, of textualism and originalism. The current court has made it very clear that its adopted mode of interpretation is originalism. Even within originalism, there's different camps. It's just like anything else. There's different sort of like ways of enacting or understanding the theory or what have you. Textualism was the prevailing theory prior to that. And prior to that, it was more, I forget the term, but it's more functionalist before it became textualist. Then it became textualist. Then it became originalist. But I'm not sure how that what the specific text that the court was interpreting in that 9-0 decision that it made, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm misdirecting us here. I just notice a pattern with the way that language is used and interpreted and written. So maybe the language with which this decision was written, it kind of mirrors the way that constitutional language is interpreted. It seems to be there's just like a language game Whether it's an originalist or textualist approach, there's this sort of language game that allows for broadly different interpretations to be reached. And then the authoritative version is the one that is ideologically predisposed by the justice.
Yeah. I had a philosophy professor once who I made that objection to a text we were discussing in class. I was like, this just feels like playing language games. And he responded that basically like, yeah, well, I mean, what do you think this is? What do you think this class is?
Trump did state that he was going to comply with the ruling.
Yeah.
And that he respects the Supreme Court. So I don't know if he says he's going to do it and he's just not going to, or if he actually will. We'll see.
Right.
But that means to what degree can he perform obeisance to the court while not really, right?
There is a substantial. So here's my reading of the situation on this like constitutional crisis, confrontation of the executive with the judiciary, is that there is a very substantial portion of the Republican Party and its base, leadership and base, that would not tolerate Trump openly flouting the courts.
Right.
So I don't think that Trump would be capable of doing that. Because of that, I don't think that he would be capable of doing it. That said, what he is capable of doing is pushing the boundaries of compliance with the court's directives to its furthest possible conceivable extent, in any and every instance made available to him. But he's got to push back and try to make it seem like he's complying with the courts, or there's this one trial judge who's an extremist and hates Trump or whatever, and whatever. But he can't do that openly. For example, once he appeals it and the higher court says no, and then he appeals that higher court and the Supreme Court says no, he has to at least pretend to be complying with the court's directive.
Right.
Well, I think that we should broach the topic of Trump's fascism. What do y'all think?
I was just thinking this conversation about appearing to and attempting to at least give a veneer of constitutionality is very. It definitely leads toward that question.
To put a button on it, though, in true Ben fashion, the pretense is the arena of whether or not we're in a constitutional crisis. And if we leave pretense behind, then we're in truly uncharted territory, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But as I've said a million times before, this wouldn't be the first time we were in a constitutional crisis, and the republic still stands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
and also, just because it's bad and it should be opposed, doesn't make it fascism.
Right.
Yes.
Fascism is not an equivalent term for right wing and authoritarian. Although there's a part of me that's hesitant to make too much of an issue out of that. I think a lot of the times when people just say Trump's a fascist or whatever, stop this fascist, whatever, it's just a rhetorical flourish, and who gives a shit? It's just sort of like bickering about rhetoric that I don't think we should bring an academic scholarly sort of distinction into public political
no, there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah,
there's a time and a place, but like the time and the place is like here, like right in this setting, it's a good idea. But like on the protest line in front of the Tesla dealership is not the place.
Right.
If someone has a poster which says "Stop Fascism" and they have a MAGA and it's crossed out, it's like that's that whatever.
Right. But like
in this recording, yes, we should definitely quibble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Daniel Bessner,
liberals have cried wolf so much about fascism that no one pays attention to it anymore, and that's one of the things we've learned from Kamala's. Instead of like dealing with issues or having strong stances in her campaign, she just played up fears of Trump's fascism, and nobody gave a shit. Nobody did. It was completely ineffective. Rhetoric is supposed to be useful. It's supposed to have like some sort of effect, and not just the effect of people blowing you off for using the word.
Right. Yeah, and I want to make the point that the current administration is horrendous and is doing
Yes.
abysmal, horrifying things and affecting all sorts of people. Some of whom we're close to, some of whom we're not close to, but it doesn't matter. It is unequivocally a horrifying administration.
Yeah.
But I just don't want to call it Hitler, because it's as horrifying as Woodrow Wilson. It's as horrifying as Andrew Jackson. It's as horrifying as Recep Erdogan.
Truman.
Yeah, I was going to Truman, Erdogan,
Ronald Reagan,
George W. Bush.
Yeah.
It's actually less horrifying than George W. Bush.
In some respects, yes.
In some respects, yes. In some respects, no.
In body count, yes.
In body count, yes. And honestly, he's playing off of precedents set by the Bush and Obama administrations. So it's like, you have to think back to how horrified you were with the Patriot Act in the early 2000s, right?
Well, and also, like, ICE didn't even exist before George W. Bush.
Yeah, he created it. ICE.
We often forget that. We think of this country's institutions, and we think they're all very, very long, very well established. But like, ICE was founded in 2005.
Yep.
So this article you got us to read by Daniel Bessner, who I've been thoroughly impressed with every time I've listened to or read, he very lucidly makes a point we've made often that I just want to read, and it speaks to what you mentioned, Kevin. And certainly we should not be correcting people like on the picket line or anything like that. But he says in the Jacobin piece, indeed, at various points, observers have criticized the fascism debate for being little more than a navel-gazing academic exercise, a decadent example of scholarly disconnection in an era when the Trump administration is causing very real human suffering. But this criticism, while understandable, misses the mark. To name something is to diagnose it, and to diagnose a malady is to identify a cure. An incorrect political diagnosis will inevitably lead to ineffective resistance. If a patient suffered from heart disease, but a doctor diagnosed them with a hemorrhoid, then eventually the patient might die from their heart disease. A similar thing could be said for democracy. So I feel like that's the Clarion, that's where we have been positioning ourselves these past several years.
So if Trump is Hitler, then a popular front to stop Hitler with the progressive bourgeoisie is less stupid and egregious than if Trump is Trump, you know?
Right.
And actually just a marginally not as constitutional as previous presidents have been recently, you know? I don't know about marginally, maybe egregiously not as constitutional. But, you know, still, everywhere where the constitutional boundaries are being pushed, there is some sort of ambiguity for which he could argue that it's still within the bounds of constitutionality.
I mean, that depends because, like, if you think about Lyndon Johnson and COINTELPRO, like, was that constitutional?
No,
absolutely not.
No, absolutely. So, look, here's how I would frame it: is that I think the difference between Trump and previous movements in an illiberal direction and any rational, assessment would regard as unconstitutional moves of Congress and the executive is that Trump is outside of the norm or outside of the mainstream of the establishment order and the predominant opinion of the present ruling class. Previous moves have been made within the bounds of what is approved of by the establishment and the ruling class. Trump is pushing against and stepping outside of those boundaries. One of the things that a recurrent point that I've frequently made to people is, that I learned in studying constitutional law is that saying something is unconstitutional it's a provocative statement in a similar manner as saying something is, somebody's a fascist. It's sometimes correct. And it is moving when you can support that assertion. and so it tends to be overused. People will say, I disagree with this thing, and they'll say, in support of saying I disagree with this thing, they'll say it's unconstitutional. The reality of our constitutional order is anything that the Supreme Court says is constitutional, and that includes the entire history of the decisions that the court has made, and that also includes anything that this present 6-3 Trump majority court says is constitutional is constitutional. So claiming that something is, constitutional or not constitutional or steps outside of the constitutional order is to say whatever this present court thinks is within the bounds of what may be permitted is permissible, and that includes the Patriot Act and COINTELPRO and Iran-Contra and sending a green card holder out of to a foreign concentration camp and then refusing to go retrieve him once you've been ordered to by a lower court because the executive can't be ordered by the judiciary to engage in any particular act of international relations. These are all under our present system constitutional. And so what's provoking so much, a lot of the outlash, I think, that we see or backlash that we see from liberals is the fact that is not the fact that he's acting in a way that violates our norms of our liberal norms, because as Jason and Chris and I think Ben as well, you've rightly noted, so has a great deal of our executives and Congresses prior to now. What makes it provocative is that he's stepping outside of the acceptable norms, range of normative behavior for an executive to engage in, as established by the present ruling class, the present establishment order.
So this further down, Besner references the U.S. Congress being the constitutional responsible party for declaring war, right? And he says that it's done so 11 times, but the last time was 1942. And then he goes on to say, since then, we've essentially been in a ongoing, if usually ignored, constitutional crisis.
What's the authorization for use of force? I forget the name of the acronym that's used for it, but Congress adopted that, and that has been used for every act of, expansion of drone warfare, intervention in Iraq. Well,
he lists Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the Iraq wars, and then all of the secret actions, more than 200 secret undeclared actions to enemies that are no one knows about. But this ongoing constitutional crisis, I think, is enlightening to think about this as being like many, many decades in the making, as opposed to one single presidency. And then Gary Wills has a thesis in his book, Bomb Power, which is basically ever since the executive was, ever since the development of the atomic bomb, and the executive being where the buck stops there, we have essentially in that instance a dictator, because so there are many different iterations of constitutional crisis that are not called as such. I'm just watching Kevin's face and I'm like, oh.
I whinge at the use of the term constitutional crisis. I think it's actually true because of Trump's current actions that we are in a low order, low boil, low temperature constitutional crisis. But that term, there's a lot packed in there that doesn't. I suppose a big part of that diatribe I just went on was what I'm trying to get at is what the constitutional order is not necessarily a defensible or good thing. it is a floating signifier that moves with whatever the prevailing norms are of if all three branches of a government agree that these are the actions that should happen, proceed forth, then and there's no problem with it, then there's no constitutional crisis, no matter how heinous, horrific, awful, horrible it is. And so if Trump does terrible, horrible things, the Congress doesn't pass any laws saying the executive shall not do X, Y, Z, and the Supreme Court doesn't issue an order saying the executive shall not do X, Y, Z, there is no constitutional crisis.
I think that if there is to be a very useful political figure in American in the near future in the American political landscape, they will adopt a posture at least somewhat similar to that of Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, which is to say, this republic sucks. We need a new one. We need a sixth republic.
Yeah, exactly.
So the constitutional crisis is that what's happening is happening because the Constitution can't prevent it. That's why it's, whether or not it's technically in or out of the bounds is secondary. The more important thing is that this social order and the way it functions is damaging to our lives, and that's the crisis.
Right. It's something that really infuriates me about liberals. It's like, oh, well, you didn't vote for Trump. I mean, you didn't vote for Kamala, and now look, we have a constitutional crisis. And I'm like, dude, your constitution sucks. That's why there's a crisis.
Exactly.
The Constitution is the crisis.
Exactly. Exactly. So formally, a constitutional crisis is when the Supreme Court tells the executive to do something, the executive flouts the Supreme Court's dictate, its order or whatever, and there is, and as Andrew Jackson said, the Supreme Court has made its decision. Now let it enforce it. The executive responds by simply flouting the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has no mechanism to make the executive fall in line. That is a constitutional crisis because the constitutional order isn't functioning correctly. That's what makes it a crisis in the public use of that phrase currently as we exist in the world. I suppose the point that I want to try to that makes me whinge about that is exactly Jason's point, is that your Constitution fucking sucks, and everything that has been approved by the proper constitutional order up to this point is a massive part of the fucking problem. I don't care if there's an internal contradiction within your stupid fucking system, if your stupid system has gotten us here to begin with.
Yep. But, if we just get the right guy in there, then he can flip the proper switches and bring everything back into balance.
Yeah, and then it can be a living constitution again that's able to evolve and
then we could make like America, we can make it great again.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about how misdiagnosing the problem means that we're going to prescribe preparation H for heart disease. I think that's what the Danny Bessner said in his article. I mean, I think that bringing up some examples of what he's talking about from his article might help underscore the point a little bit more. He says that Trump's authoritarianism is absolutely right-wing and authoritarian, but it is in a very American fashion, right? Every single thing that Trump is doing has American precedents. We don't, I think that looking at Trump's racism, mass deportations, targeting people for, speaking out against an apartheid state that's committing a genocide, those are not fascistic things. Those are very much so things that democratic presidents have done in the past, right? I mean, looking at the internment of Japanese civilians during World War II, based solely on their ethnic origin and no other reason, while not detaining Germans or Italians, even though we were at war with them as well on the other side of the world. It's just because for whatever reason, I guess that the Asians are sneakier or whatever, whatever. I mean, that's exactly what it was. The Asians were like thought to be sneaky, and they wouldn't assimilate, right? And they look different, so it's easy to demonize and attribute non-American characteristics to them, because Germans and Italians just look like Americans, right? Other Americans. And by other Americans, I mean white people. But like, stuff like that. And then, I mean, just the Native American genocide. He doesn't mention that, but that should be in there. And everyone's favorite constitutional crisis to refer to is the Trail of Tears by Andrew Jackson, who defied the Supreme Court and said, send your army to make me stop deporting Indians to Oklahoma or whatever. In every single instance of Trump's fascism, there is a homegrown precedent for it. And I think it might be a good idea to go through some of those.
Well, right. And like, I think that what's being missed, or what people are missing, is that they're saying, they often will say like, well, is it fascism yet? It's like, no, it's terrible. It's egregious. It should be resisted. But it's the state doing it. And it's not paramilitary, non-state actors. There's no mass politics. There's no mass expression of a fascist movement, because there's not a fascist movement. This is just the state doing what they did whenever miners went on strike in the 1890s. This is what the state did whenever any number of things that the state didn't like in any previous year, any other time before now.
I think I distracted Chris by sharing my link.
Yeah, I was looking at the link.
Oh, well, Ben, I know I talked to you about this already.
Stupid thing to do. We're having conversations here. I can't stop and read an article.
Yeah, don't use the chat features for saying like BRB.
Okay, so Ben shared a link that if I read the whole thing, it might tell me something, but it doesn't really tell me anything from the abstract that I read.
There were
detainees.
Yeah, there were detainees of German and Italian ancestry.
Right, there were, but they were done on they were assessed on an individual basis, unlike the Japanese, who were interned en masse.
Right.
Because of their ethnicity. And generally Germans who were detained in the United States were recent immigrants or children of recent immigrants. And that has a lot to do with the call for German citizens to return to the fatherland. And there were a bunch of Americans who went, and then some that came back. And there were there was the German American Bund in the United States, which was a Nazi party which wanted to overthrow the United States government and install a fascist dictatorship. And there's not really anything equivalent on the Japanese side. There were, some people that were, loyal to the emperor, obviously, that lived in America, but the level of repression didn't match the level of interest in the other side winning.
Something that's forgotten about the Executive Order 9066 that interned Japanese. It was only along the coasts. So there were actually kind of movements to find, like I was reading a biography of this poet I like, Kenneth Rexroth, who was helping young Japanese Americans and Japanese nationals who lived in California go to trade schools in Chicago. Because if you lived in the interior of the United States, you were not interned. So it was just along the Pacific and Atlantic coasts.
Right, which I've read that most of what motivated them to deport Japanese, well, not deport, I guess internally deport Japanese off the coast is so that their land can be stolen, because a lot of them were successful farmers. But, okay, so let's go through these things. So he says that he wants to begin with the attempted dismantling of the administrative state. So you don't have to point to any he says you don't have to point to the Führer principle, which is the placing all authority in the person of Adolf Hitler. But that applies to most fascist or all fascist variants, is this idea of the rule by a single strongman. But yeah, he says that since the founding of the Republic, the presidency has grown in power while Congress, the supposed representative of people's will, has abdicated its responsibilities. And it ebbs and flows, but there's always been this idea of the unitary executive. And I listened to an NPR report about the Trump's first 100 days, and I got to say, like, I listened to 5 episodes of the NPR Politics podcast, and I have to.
Oh, wow.
It was incredibly excruciating to get through, and not because most of what they were saying was wrong or whatever. They were generally correct in their criticisms, but because of how just NPR it was, it was like NPR searches out the nerdiest sounding liberals they can find, and actually everything that fucking Trump says, and it's just so smug and self-satisfied. It's like you people are acting like you didn't just like hand the country over to a guy that you think is a fascist, right? But
there's also
the reason why is because they do not think he's a fascist.
No, they don't actually think he's a fascist. Yeah.
But that's the insidious nature of NPR, is they're refusing to take responsibility for their framing, because their framing is invisible.
Right. That was one of the points that they were making, is that the unitary executive is a project that's like over 200 years old, and that, it's in the Federalist Papers, right? The debate goes all the way back to the Federalist Papers, and that like some presidents have beefed up the unitary executive and some have, just let it stand. And Trump is really just sort of an accelerant in the way that FDR was, or that Ronald Reagan was, or that George Bush was.
Or that Abraham Lincoln was.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, absolutely. The libertarians' least favorite president because of that. Because of that. Yeah.
Or that Bernie Sanders would need to be to actually effectuate his policies.
Yeah.
Like let's just to make sure, just to put all our cards on the table. It's the problem with the liberal critique of Trump is not that they are inconsistent, although that is a problem. But because I also think that a president of our side would have to be like a Hugo Chavez type figure. Would have to be a very powerful president until we had a new constitution. Are
you advocating for a populist left-wing Bonapartist figure, Jason?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Aziz, I have unequivocally yes, indeed.
Aziz Rana has. I heard him recently talk about precisely this point, that he disagrees that it's just like Lincoln or FDR. He would distinguish those from the other examples that you said. In that,
I wouldn't say it's just like. I would say it's like
it is an increase in executive authority. Yes, right. But that is the limit of the parallel, because the difference is that these presidents had mass popular swelling of support behind them.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
In addition to an overwhelming majority in Congress behind the authority that they were exerting, these individuals were asserting popular will against the entrenched constitutional order. And that is a categorically distinct act from the assertion of executive power against other branches of government or other established mechanisms of power without an overwhelming popular support behind them.
So Trump has a marginal majority of the electorate behind him, and a compliant Congress rather than a supportive Congress. So, I mean, like...
Yeah, that is an important difference.
I mean, the way that you phrase that, of the electorate, he's got a plurality of the electorate, and the electorate doesn't represent the entirety of the population. I think the distinction that Aziz Rana is making there is that it's an important factor to look at the electorate and the representation in government, but one must look beyond that and look at actual social forces playing out.
But in absence of social forces,
yeah,
there's the electorate.
Well, right, like
yes,
also
no,
just to be very just yeah.
Well, I mean, this is precisely the distinction that he's making. I think I think he's correct in this, and also I'm sort of puppeteering him here a little bit here, but so hopefully, I'm getting him correct, but that's precisely the distinction. That is the point. That's the distinction, is that there are actual social forces at play behind the increase in executive power that FDR exerted, behind the increase in executive power that Lincoln exerted, that are not behind the increase in executive power that Trump exerted, and that makes it a category difference.
Sure.
I'm prepared to accept that.
Yeah, me too. But I think that that is our lot in this post-mass politics era.
Yeah.
And it is to either oppose or support these types of choices made by an individual, right?
Right.
And that's the way that politics has been framed in this country since at least the 80s,
Yeah.
Is that there's the individual that represents the will of the people, regardless of how many people are actually behind him. And you can't actually do anything to affect that individual's choices. All you can do is support it or oppose it by voting yay or nay.
Yeah, and speaking of that powerful individual, when I said I was advocating a left-wing Bonapartist figure, if we're talking about what I would like to see, I would like to see much more than that, of course. But given what is actually happening and what is likely to whatever, then yeah, fine. A left-wing Bonapartist figure is okay.
I would like to see a Bolshevik-style revolution with rule by workers' councils, actually.
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't considered that.
Yeah.
I would like, if we're talking about what I would like to see, I would like to see and the anarchists be right, and we leapfrog immediately into the communist utopia. I would like to see, unicorns shooting rainbows out of their ass, all kinds of things that I would like to see, but
I don't even know if I would like to see that.
Come on, that would be fun.
I guess it'd be kind of cool for me.
Yeah, since we're daydreaming about shit that's not real, I would like the anarchists to be right once.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, man, seriously, for real though, like that's I don't even oppose them. I'm just like, could you be right, please, for once?
In here, I'm a anarcho-primitivist, but like up here, I'm a Bolshevik,
Chris pointed to his heart first and then his head second.
Sorry, for those of you who can't see.
But if we're setting aside what I would like to see versus, in a purely abstract setting, versus what are the realities of the world that I'm interacting with, and what are the possible levers that can be pulled within it, I'm not going to mince words about the fact that I would love to. I'm absolutely in favor of a leftist Bonapartist figure.
Yeah, exactly.
Propelling history forward.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, we need an American Hugo Chavez. So someone far to the left of Bernie, right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's scrolling through the theory of the unitary executive. Sorry, I didn't write any of this down. I just figured I would use this. Okay, actually, we talked about the War Powers, right? Act. We talked about that already.
Yeah.
That we haven't declared war on anybody since we declared war on Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary in 1942. Like a couple of months after we declared war on Germany, Japan, and Italy in December of 41. But since then we've gone on to fight against Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and that's all part of like the sort of dictatorial power that's been given to the president.
Yeah. And the authorization of use of military force, AUMS. I think that might, or AUMF. That might be the acronym for it. That was passed immediately after 9/11, and that's the the grounds on which the executive has been able to do everything that it's done since 9/11. Is it cites that?
Yeah, and then the usage of non-Senate confirmed presidentially appointed positions is absolutely constitutional and has precedent that from he says, he lists here McGeorge Bundy, who was with JFK and Johnson, Walt Whitman Rostow, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, W. Anthony Lake, Condoleezza Rice, Susan Rice, John Bolton, Jake Sullivan. And then,
some of the most destructive people in the history of our country.
Right. That right there is a list of some of the worst war criminals in the history of the world right there. Yeah. Anyway, but even the use of personal representatives to convey the will of the president rather than somebody from the State Department who's been brought up through the bureaucracy and is accountable to the people or whatever. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt used Harry Hopkins, his best friend, as his personal envoy to Stalin and Mussolini and Hitler and Churchill and everyone else. Sort of the way that Trump is using Witkoff to go in, because he's the only person that he trusts, is one of his best friends for the past 30 years. But I would like to know what kind of person stays friends with Trump for 30 years. With the way that he sort of goes through associates, I don't know, generally you don't last long in Trump's favor. I mean, just not even his children.
Right.
So I would like to know what kind of person stays in Trump's favor for 30 years.
It's the same kind of person that stays in Roy Cohn's favor for 30 years.
Yeah. And then he moves on to the arrest of Badr Khan Suri and Mahmoud Khalil, and says, we don't have to go very far back to use to find deportations of people on political grounds. And then he lists what Adam Goodman has called the deportation machine during World War I. Talks about Woodrow Wilson using the authority of the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act of 1917 and 18 to deport American citizens for seditious activities. And, the first Red Scare and the Palmer raids ended up deporting a bunch of anarchists and communists to the Bolshevik Russia at the time, even though they were naturalized or born American citizens. So this is hardly unprecedented. And then he talked about, in the Cold War, deporting political subversives to Mexico for no other reason than that they were here illegally, supposedly. And then in the War on Terror, he talked about this guy named Jose Padilla, who was accused of working with Al-Qaeda. He was never convicted and didn't really have any evidence to charge him with this, but he was detained without a charge for 3 years. This is hardly unprecedented. It might just be a little bit more high profile and without an immediate trigger, because this kind of stuff that happened after 9/11, all the egregious things that happened after 9/11 were sort of given tacit approval by everybody in the country because it happened right after 9/11. There were people who spoke up, and I'm proud to admit that I'm proud to claim myself as one of them. I opposed all of this shit from 2001 on.
But it happened on foreign soil. That I think that is, I think that's a big part of the difference that is claimed by a lot of the opposition, is that these things happened on, the assassination of a U.S. citizen, the indefinite detainment without charge of Jose Padilla. These things were initiated by on foreign soil. Jose Padilla being a U.S. citizen. It was under the guise of, we are overseas at war. We killed or captured somebody who was we're not gonna actually charge them with it, but we're gonna sort of imply that they were an enemy combatant or in some way sort of associated with enemy combatants, and therefore it's justified. So a whole lot of the establishment liberal order sort of shrugged their shoulders at it and were like, well, they made their bed, they can lie in it. And now we see the sort of the creep of it, the slippery slope of it.
Sure.
One edge closer is the enemy combatants are within the borders of the United States, picked up and taken out because they are kind of associated with enemy combatants.
That's how precedent works.
Exactly. Who are enemy combatants, not because of a declaration of Congress, but because of an act of the executive, unilateral.
Right.
And I mean, it will continue to slide further and further as these things just keep happening and keep going. Part of me wants to say unopposed, but I mean, there's opposition.
There's some opposition.
Yeah,
but that's the thing, is that this is a rotten fucking system that is getting worse and worse and worse all the time. But liberals pretend like it has this demarcation line where Trump is president and all of a sudden everything starts getting bad. And that's not even an exaggeration. There's just a complete disconnect between, January of this year and what happened before. And there was a 4 years in between Trump's presidencies where everything was good and normal again. And we didn't have to worry about what the president was doing, even though he was like trying to get us involved in a nuclear war with Russia and then aiding and abetting a genocide. But I mean, and then also
it's kind of
carrying
like
out mass deportations.
It's kind of like how for 8 years under Obama that we had the Occupy Wall Street movement. There's a Trayvon Martin, which gave birth to the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a
Standing Rock.
There was all kinds of at least low-level rumblings in the American labor movement. And then Donald Trump got elected, and all of a sudden everybody was like, well, not everybody, but a lot of liberal-leaning people were like, oh my God, everything's changing. Everything's gotten bad. It's like, dude, where were you all these last 8 years?
Not paying attention, because they say it themselves. I liked it better when I didn't have to pay attention.
If Hillary was president,
exactly,
you'd be at brunch right now.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like sometimes we get sort of criticized for drawing our fire more often in the direction of toward the left, which is say in the direction of liberals. And it's like, that's kind of true, but that's because we are of the left, and the people that make up our side sometimes, when in an off year, whenever a president of the right wing is in power, the people on our side are all the liberals who go away when there's the liberal in power. And so, we kind of draw our fire more on the people who are wishy-washy.
Speaking of liberals and being wishy-washy, I wasn't totally familiar with the specificities of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which Besner lists. And so this kind of pushes against our sort of obsessive focus on unitary executive power. This was introduced in the House by Democrats in 1951, passed in the House, passed in the Senate, vetoed by Truman, overridden by the House, overridden by the Senate. So this is a wholly democratic act that created this deportation machine that I think Woody Guthrie would write about, or that might have been during Eisenhower with his song Deportee. Just interesting to me how this is a much, much bigger problem than the powers of the president. This is throughout, throughout our government.
Very much so.
I was going to say, I just read that the State Department is being downsized by 2,000 positions, and never mind. I think Trump is good. He's destroying the State Department. So,
okay, wasn't that a maneuver of Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense? He's downsizing the State Department.
Secretary of State? Yeah, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State.
Yeah, you're right.
My understanding is that part of the conflict between, I don't know if listeners were familiar with a conflict emerging from behind the scenes in the Trump administration. There have been hints that the conflict was between Elon Musk and Marco Rubio, in particular. Rubio being the most significant opponent to Musk in within the administration. And what I've read is that Rubio felt like Musk was doing a shitty job of the same thing that he thought should be done, and he couldn't get credit for it because Musk was doing it and doing a shitty job of it, of downsizing government across the board. And one of the major oppositions that Musk was facing within the administration was when Doge was going to turn its attention to the State Department that was within Rubio's area of control. And he was highly oppositional to Doge cutting in on his turf. And he wanted to be the one who was downsizing government in this area without Doge's input. And so he wanted to do the same thing, but under his own terms and with a little more precision than Doge was engaging in government cuts with.
We could talk about Doge real quick if you guys wanted to. If we're assessing Trump's first 100 days, Doge has been like an absolute just failure at saving money.
We should, but I do want to I want to say a little bit more real quick about the drawing our fire more towards our left to the liberals. I think that's because of course that's true, and because
fuck them, that's why.
Yes, but also I do welcome a lot of people's return to pseudo opposition, and I do hope that the anti-oligarchy tour and Bernie Sanders and AOC, I hope that does spark something. I just, whatever. I think we need to stand for much more than just
AOC's bid to be in charge of the Democratic Party.
That's definitely true. I mean, outside. I mean, beyond that, like, the way that the Occupy Wall Street movement is where the Fight for 15 comes from, and the way that EFCA is where the Occupy Wall Street movement came from, and so on.
Right.
And in the same way, I feel like the anti-oligarchy moment and the thrice now return to a pseudo-populist kind of, maybe a real Democrat, whatever, that kind of thinking. I welcome that. I think we should be very critical of it. But I don't want to be so dismissive of it as to say none of this matters, because I don't want to be a nihilist.
Sure.
I just won't ever be misunderstood here. I want to stand for more than that, but I also want to stand for that.
I mean, I think that the only comments I've seen about it from the left are that Bernie Sanders and AOC are sheepdogging people back into the Democratic Party. And to a certain extent, I understand where they're coming from. But I think in order to sheepdog people, you have to have something to sheepdog them away from. Right?
Right. Back in the Democratic Party suggests that they were going somewhere. If they were going somewhere, if we want them to go somewhere, then the like 70,000 real Communist Party of whatever that you find on Twitter, really there's like 200 people. All of those things have to be much, much more substantial, significant, united, and effective, and involved in the neighborhoods, in the workplaces, and until that time, yes, I very much, again, like I said just a few minutes ago, until that time, yes, I want a Sanders figure.
Yeah.
Even at the Democratic Party.
Honestly, but these people are correct in that what will happen is the revitalization of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party will cease to do anything, and the people will just be disappointed. But I think that the best possible thing that can happen to workers beyond the spontaneous just upspringing of workers' institutions again would be to have expectations unmet when it comes to something like this anti-oligarchy tour. Like if people get quote unquote sheepdog back into the Democratic Party and see that once again, that the Democratic Party has nothing to offer. I think that's a good thing, and I think that will be the inevitable sort of end of this anti-oligarchy tour that they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's sort of what I said about Bernie also, that if Bernie was to be elected president, there wouldn't have been a lot that he could have done. And I think that it would have been the ultimate indictment of the Democratic Party to finally give people what they want and then for them not to actually be able to do anything.
Well, before we get ahead of our skis, just looking at this moment, though, it is very significant that you have people who couldn't stand Bernie Sanders 4 years ago, for the very sake that they couldn't countenance his democratic socialism, or what he calls democratic socialism, who are now going to these huge gatherings because the Democratic Party is so pathetic. So for the very fact that someone is actually saying something, actually voicing a plan of action, I think that's pretty significant.
It's incredibly significant. I think that these rallies are the first hint of a return to mass politics. Like, this is how politics should be done. And it's my frustration with Jason. I think you exactly hit the nail on the head that Jason and Chris hit the nail on the head that
and not Ben.
Not Ben. Definitely not Ben.
Chris is flipping me off.
That the criticism of sheepdogging necessarily assumes that there's something that people are being sheepdogged away from. It's not like there's some alternative out there that the working class is all like moving in swarms toward some sort of revolutionary or even just working class oriented project. And Bernie and AOC are showing up to sheepdog them back toward the liberal bourgeoisie, away from that. It's just they are appearing and doing. They are the only ones who are doing and are capable of doing this return to mass politics in a moment of rising reactionary authoritarianism. The way to address that is through mass politics. Mm-hmm. You pressure the members of Congress who are supporting this move, these authoritarian right-wing moves, by holding mass rallies in their districts. That's how you do mass politics. The criticism should it's hard to criticize somebody who's actually showing up and doing the thing that needs to be done, even though they're doing it wrong. And I wish they were doing it differently or better.
I would say that these things have a way of gaining their own momentum as well, right? Like if there are mass rallies, if there's some sort of mass movement against Trumpism or whatever, and socialists can be there to help interject their politics into it. I guess if there was something worth recruiting people to, that would be the place to do it. That's my old ISO brain coming out. That's what we would have done, right? We would have had a fraction that related to mass movements, and we would have sent people to sell socialist workers there. If Bernie and AOC are sheepdogs, then it's just that if all the sheep are just walking alongside of an unbroken fence and there are two dogs there with them, the dogs aren't actually doing anything, right? They're just going along with the sheep. If there's no hole in the fence for them to get out, then the dogs don't have to do anything.
I think that's why people are going to see them, because they're calling things as they are, as opposed to what the Democratic Party is doing, this doublespeak endlessly, this insanity of being afraid to name reality as it is. And so because the messaging is more than just Democratic Party sheepdogging, it is populist naming of reality. They're not just calling out MAGA, they're calling out the ruling class. They're calling out the oligarchy. They're calling out the wealthy. They're calling out the billionaires. And that just doesn't go away as soon as you get people onto the Democratic side of the fence. That message remains. People have invested in a message of class resentment, which they already feel. But now people are saying it in the open among thousands together. That's the significance.
It's an attempt to rebrand the Democratic Party into a left populist party. It's not going to work.
Well, that's part of it. But there's more happening than that.
Absolutely. No, you're right about that. But I'm saying like what AOC and Bernie are trying to do is assert Bernie's politics that he's had forever as the politics of the Democratic Party.
And pass the torch.
And pass the torch. I don't think it's going to work. I think that, the Democratic Party is forever the B team of capital, and it will always be. But, I think that getting people all amped up about, like, just riled up with class anger and disappointing them is a good thing.
Yeah. And I think the rallies are very likely intentionally meant to be setting AOC up for a presidential run, if not in the next round of elections, then the one following. And I think that's going to fall flat on its face. I think she's going to round up like one section, maybe even a significant section of the Democratic Party primary electorate. But she's not going to win the presidency.
She's going to lose the primary to Pete Buttigieg.
Totally. Although Bernie said something in an interview that was interesting
Gavin
to me.
Newsom even, or who knows?
Some other like fucking bloodless ghoul.
Yeah.
So who was that? Yeah. Who was that independent candidate for the race was it Nebraska? I think I might be getting the state wrong. But Bernie was putting that forward, that Republicans and Democrats should run as independents and have like strong labor politics like this guy did. He sounded sort of like a diagonalist candidate. I might be getting the state wrong, but he nearly won.
I vaguely remember that situation.
I think that AOC's long ago sealed her fate. I think it was pretty early on when she got elected. After she got elected, she basically fired all of her staff that were outsider. So she got elected playing the inside-outside strategy, and then pretty soon after getting elected, she fired the entirety of her staff that was the outside half of that strategy, and the entire rest of it remaining were the inside strategy people. And she long ago sealed her fate as just climbing the ladder inside the DNC, and
they've both been pretty abysmal on Gaza.
Yeah, exactly. And just being not only will she fail, she will deserve to have failed. Is I guess what I'm trying to get at.
Dan Osborne was the guy I was trying to think of.
That's Ozzy's brother.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit? I mean, I know we're at an hour and a half, but there's like Trump's 100 days is barely actually even been touched on in this conversation.
Well, we've talked about how much everything that he's done has sucked. So I guess we can reflect on that.
Well, one of the things that we were all, I think, hoping showed promise was his ability to end the war in Ukraine. And he's failing at that spectacularly. And there's, Chris can speak to all the different. He has been speaking to the different elements of that on the geopolitics episodes. But yeah, Trump doesn't have the cards. It seems, he said Zelensky didn't, but it seems like Trump doesn't have them either.
In a grander sense, whatever the question is, Trump doesn't have the cards, but mostly it's because he doesn't actually want the cards. So just very quickly, I just want to make a really quick case that the Donald Trump MAGA moment is a kind of phony, pseudo, spectacular revolt, in quotations, against the liberal world order. And it's not at all genuine. It's not intended to be. It's not even believed to be. So if you're talking about Doge cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, like they cut like less money from the budget than is to be approved in the next budget for the military. So like it's very obviously it's phony.
Right.
When it comes to being America first, is about as Israel first as can be.
Right.
But not any more than any of the last however many presidents we have had since Israel was founded.
I mean, he did force for a little bit there a ceasefire, which is something that Biden could have done and refused to do.
Yeah, for a little while. That's right.
But then, Trump is beholden to his donors, ultimately. And he listens to the last person who was in the room. And at some point, that last person was probably Miriam Adelson or something.
Yep.
And I think that maybe the most significant thing is the tariff policies, the blanket trade war against literally every landmass on Earth, including the ones which are not populated, because Donald Trump does not understand just the economic terms that he's, It'd be one thing if Trump was actually positioning himself against neoliberalism and saying we need to onshore all the production, whatever. So we need an industrial policy and interventionist state. That would be something that I would be even critically in support of. But instead, nothing makes sense at all. So my kind of quick assessment of Trump's 100 days is that this is a different version of what we would have experienced if Joe Biden was president again. It's the decline of the American empire. Either we're coasting in our decline or we're speeding up in our decline, but nobody's reversing it.
So I will say that I have approved of two things Trump has done. And one is just completely eviscerate the USAID, the regime change slush fund that. He has cut the good parts of USAID, which are still soft power instruments for American imperialism, even if they are, helping poor people and vaccinating children in Africa and stuff like that. It is ultimately soft power. And that's what it was conceived of being when it was first implemented by JFK. And that's what it still is. But it's also a hard power slush fund. Like that's a place where it's unaccountable money that can be used for doing nefarious things like supporting a coup in Ukraine and then paying for neo-Nazi podcasters, like literally paying for neo-Nazi podcasters in Ukraine to shore up the war effort. But stuff like that. Anyway, I'm glad that he eviscerated USAID. And I actually think that even though he's doing a terrible job at it, I applaud him trying to end the war in Ukraine. I just wish that he wasn't such a dipshit and would just say, you know what, Ukraine, you're cut off. What's he going to do? Leverage more sanctions against Russia? But anyway, I think that there are two things that Trump has accidentally done that are good. And two of those are them. The reason they wanted to cut off USAID is for really stupid reasons, like because they promote transgenderism in Pakistan or something like that. That was one of the reasons that they put forward. It's basically they just want to cut government spending. And they think that one place to do that is places where we're trying to help people and promote liberal values. And that's why we should get rid of USAID. And then the other one was just, cutting off Ukraine from the supply of U.S. weapons because it's prolonging an unnecessary war that is going to end with a military solution no matter what. That's all I have to say about Trump's first 100 days. He's been a complete disaster, and even the good stuff that he's done has just been on accident.
But even the USAID was a pittance. It was a drop in the bucket. If the goal is to save money, they're just going after these soft targets, which sometimes are accidentally good. But if you are if the goal
was to save money, they would not be extending the Bush tax cuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And they wouldn't be trying to approve a $1 trillion military budget.
Yeah.
Also, to target waste, abuse, and fraud adequately takes some amount of steady, and it's a timely process. To slash and burn the government is going to hurt your own agenda, even if it is the MAGA agenda.
And you got to do it in the Pentagon first and foremost.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the one thing they're not going to do.
$1 trillion, right? Is the budget?
$1 trillion. That's what they're proposing. Of course, they have to pass it, but yeah,
I think they'll pass it.
Probably. And that's there's one thing we know about Trump is that he is able to get bipartisan support for anything that kills people.
Говорят, рабочие и крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас. Без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, вернуть труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.